Welcome to Warehouse421 Conversations and a discussion about art and artists in times of disruption. My name is Hind Mezaina. I'm an artist and a co-founder and co-host of Tea with Culture podcast. Since March 14th, museums and culture spaces across the UAE closed their doors for health and safety reasons due to the coronavirus. It's been a tough 2 weeks for all since that announcement, and Warehouse421 invited me to moderate a discussion about the impact of the current interruptions in the local art ecosystem and the various ways that livelihood in the arts can continue during times of disruption. With me are 3 guests from different parts of the art sector to have this conversation. Please introduce yourselves.
Hello, my name is Kevin Jones. I'm a writer and educator based in Dubai, and I'm also the founder of a consultancy called Juniper Mind, which works with artists and brands around new forms of innovation.
Hi, my name is Zahra Jewanjee. I'm a multidisciplinary artist and educator based in Dubai.
My name is Umer Butt. I am the founder and co-director of a contemporary art gallery in Dubai called Grey Noise.
So March is normally a art month in Dubai, normally known as March Madness, because of the increased number of activities with exhibitions and talks and performances and events. And of course, it kind of leads up to Art Dubai, which normally takes place towards the end of the month. And over the past few years, we've seen newer art-related events also taking place in other Emirates, like in Abu Dhabi and Sharjah, that gets added to the calendar of this art month. And I saw Art Dubai's announcement early March, 3rd of March to be specific, about postponing the fair due to ongoing global health implications of the coronavirus. And I noticed soon after that there was this kind of domino effect of more announcements of closures in the arts and culture sector. And I know these are unprecedented times for all, and we're all seeing almost every single industry being impacted, especially financially because of this pandemic. And many of us are taking it a day at a time in terms of all the news and changes. But what has been the impact so far, and how have you and your peers been handling it? And can we start maybe with Umar, if you tell me, because I think the galleries are one of the main spaces that have been affected.
Well, it's pretty much on a daily basis a new sense of inquiry as far as what I feel I am going through at the moment. May it be not just currently thinking about the future too much, just thinking about what's happening literally every hour. I already sense through negotiating a lot of material which is being shared on different online platforms that there will be a very aggressive, I would say, shift in how art galleries and businesses related to contemporary art dealing or other genre. I mean, they're going to specifically think more carefully, restructure the norms, the templates that we've all known for since, let's say, the real prime time of the white cube or the gallery kind of structure. Yeah, I mean, I'm personally really more responding to the slowness of time for me. We, at our end, usually work with a specific sort of, methodologies. And I think I'm just really at that moment incubating ideas. Might it be starting conversations with artists that we usually talk to and take their point of view, also what they are feeling. So I think the word which for me is quite important right now is, how everybody's feeling about this, because and I also consider using this term, which might be a bit forward, but I feel it's like a reset moment.
Yeah, a reset button, I think, is something I've been thinking about. Is this an opportunity to reset and rethink? And is this something you're feeling with other commercial galleries as well? Is there like a sense of, I think, feeling that you're all going through this together? Do you feel like there's more maybe, are you all talking to each other? I mean, I'm assuming, I know normally you do.
I think we are curious. We're talking in as far as just finding out how we are, how our healths are, how the employees are. I think these are the basic concerns. And of course, I think I luckily am at that strata of galleries which are dealing with very small financial outputs. So we don't really look at very ambitious in things as far as our expenditure is concerned. But yes, New York, as we all know, and as I'm seeing my friends sharing a lot of material online to start looking at what the future entitles to them, because they are quite petrified because of really exuberant rents, and they have a very strict income feed that they have to kind of follow up to. Otherwise, it will be impossible for them to pay their employees. So one step at a time. I think I'm also trying to look at my current environment, which is the UAE, Dubai, and the art district where we're in. And a lot of conversations are happening. A lot of interesting point of views are being shared on the positive side too. And I think that it's really a moment to contemplate.
And Kevin, what have you noticed? Because you work very closely with a lot of art organizations, be them gallery spaces, or an example is also Circle Avenue in general. And yeah, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are, like even like with the reaction of the museums, like, you know, how they've responded. And so, yeah, what kind of discussions or what ideas you've seen or not seen?
Yeah, so I think, like everyone, I've been consuming a lot of stuff online, and specifically what I'm interested in is this idea of space, like how are we rethinking spaces that we typically go into. So, you know, I have a friend who says very often that, you know, artists today don't need galleries anymore; they just need a good website and to be connected to a lot of different, you know, curators and writers and people who actually can broadcast their work a little bit more forcefully. And I wonder, I mean, I don't know if I subscribe to that entirely, but I wonder how much we were not kind of rethinking this whole idea of space now. So I've been looking, so Sursok yesterday, a museum in Beirut, put through a lot of people are saying that they have virtual tours.
Yes, yeah, I've seen that
and
a
the
lot.
virtual tour is really a very two-dimensional. It's actually kind of like a gallery of images.
Just
and
images.
It hardly, you know, it barely passes as a tour, and the technology is really, you know, not really leveraging anything particularly sophisticated. You know, Sursok, to its credit, did a little bit better than that. But I wonder, you know, all of these attempts that we're seeing to sort of respatialize and rethink this idea of space. I'm spending a lot of time thinking about that and what can be done there. So, you know, I'm enjoying this sort of slumber that's sort of taken over the whole place. And I guess very recently, when I sort of broke out on my own and stopped my sort of corporate life and had you know, developed my own company, I felt that, you know, every day was you know, I worked very differently, and I spent a lot of time, you know, just in my own home as a recluse, kind of like writing and reading and stuff.
Be preparing for social distance.
Yeah, so I was already fine. I think my life is already like conditioned by social distancing from a young age. So I sort of like love the reclusiveness of it. But I also understand at one point that there will be an explosion of, you know, of this content that's coming out. And somehow I think the content needs to be held to different standards. I think we're seeing a lot of reactive content now, and I wonder how much we can sort of innovate that content a little bit more and come up with other things. So the podcast, you know, in and of itself, I think somehow people might start leapfrogging technology that has been around for a while, like the podcast, and maybe thinking of something else to do around it. So I haven't seen that yet. I haven't, you know, I don't know how wide one's net can be cast as well in this space, but I haven't seen anyone who's really sort of completely innovating that space yet.
And Zahra, as an artist, what have you been going through? What have other discussions with fellow artists, you know, what has been, because there's been a lot of communication, I think, that focused on the galleries and the collectors, and a lot of I never saw something talking about supporting the artists here, you know, and I know this month was an opportunity for lots of artists who have been making work for pretty much, you know, almost a year leading up to March, to showcase their work and exhibit and potentially sell. And I know a lot of artists are completely missing out on those opportunities. So what does that mean then, right? That the hard work that's gone in, almost a year into research and producing work, and no one's there to see it. And and I know every day new decisions are being made. Like, how do you postpone? Do you think of other ways of showing? Like, what have you what conversations have been going on in your corner?
I think personally, I just kind of sort of think it's the downtime for us in a way that we kind of sort of can think about as an artist how we can just focus on our practice and like relaunch ourselves when things get better. And I think of course things have been like. There's no doubt that we're all kind of sort of placed in this precarious position, and and it's evident that how interconnected the world is. I think what was really important was for us that whatever work that we kind of sort of produced is something it's shown in the right capacity.
So just to clarify to listeners, I think you're referring to the work that's was done for the Campus Art Dubai, which you were part of, and I believe there were 4 artists who were part of Campus Art Dubai this year, and the end goal of it was to show their work at specific spaces within the art fair, which obviously got cancelled. And so what happens? And I believe in our previous conversations you said that there was a lot of thinking about what work will be made and where will it be shown, because it was very specific to what location. And so it's not as easy as just putting the work online, right? Because it's something that was engaging with space and people, and it's a very different way of just saying, oh no, I made work and let me just put a picture of it online, because that's not also as an artist how you want to present this work, because there was more to it, right?
Yeah. I mean, like that's something which is important to us, because we kind of sort of spent the entire year keeping space in mind, keeping in mind that whatever we're creating, we wanted to have it in such a way where there is probably a public interaction, where there is interaction in such a way where the work is seen with in its best possibility.
Yeah, like I think artists are feeling a complete, I don't want to say loss, but it's very difficult for them, because like, wait, where is my, because you don't necessarily have your space to show something, and so it's a shame. I mean, I don't know, Kevin, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's so March meetings as well, which
Yes.
is probably the biggest casualty.
So just to
The
clarify
March
to
meetings,
listeners, March
yeah.
meetings organized by Sharjah Art Foundation. It's like an annual symposium that happens in March. So.
Yeah, and which largely is based around talks and again, these kind of symposia. And how does programming then kind of innovate? How does programming occupy a space online that isn't just something that's kind of one-dimensional? Whether it's local, and again, I think the local is, it's sad that it went away, but I guess we're all folded into like the giant problem, which is universal, and which really does kind of leave us all at a place of a common denominator in many ways. So yeah, I'm sad that that the Campus Art Dubai thing wasn't shown. I went to a studio visit, for what that's worth, but but then so that work won't go away, it won't disappear, but I suppose one day it will be seen. And then for the people who do have the work and it's there, how can you then put it out there in the most kind of engaging, interesting way? And then what do you do with something like the March meeting? So maybe Sharjah is hard at work kind of thinking of means of doing that, but yeah, I mean, I guess maybe it's a call to the local community as well to sort of think kind of holistically around what's happening, but it will echo immediately universally, because we all have the same problems. Now, David Zwirner probably has better ways of attacking it than Grey Noise does, sadly.
Because I mean, yeah, I think currently like galleries are still open, but by appointment only. So that's kind of one way of visiting. And I don't know. I mean, is this is a question for Umer? Like, is the engagement with collectors like important, and has that been impacted at this point?
Of the March season or whatever opening, how we open up the shows together. I think that all of this has completely stopped, and I think that even if I'm keeping my gallery open, or a couple of us are keeping the gallery open by appointment, trying to respect the regulations which are extremely essential, but I'm also thinking if I need to, like, straight away everybody started thinking about, okay, what is the method to reach out, like all this, as you said, online or writing really private personal notes to your clients about the state of affairs. They're also going through a lot of stress, right? So I think we just also have to think about humanity right now. And I feel my stance on this is slightly different to maybe a lot of other galleries which are probably profitable. We do have a commercial gallery, but I also operate on a scale which is more on the line of a borderline sort of Kunsthalle approach. Like you're making exhibitions, but of course you're trying to bring people in. Whereas your question was about the collectors, I think everybody needs to sort of restructure, rethink. And yes, they might support you. They might send you a message. I think a lot of people responded back to my personal notes, which were probably just to know if they're okay. Not to everybody, of course, to some friends. I totally understand that they need some space around to resolve. As we are in the UAE, I think Europe, where my interaction is more, people are extremely vulnerable. They are extremely, I would say, in another state of mind. So, yeah.
Yeah, because it's. I'm glad you said that, because various conversations were happening the past few weeks, and talking about like, no, we have to support the galleries and the collectors. And I said, look, in a time of health crisis, like, is how many are actually prioritizing spending money on art? And at this point, does it sound even right? Just because we know lots of places who've people have lost jobs. Industries, like I said, almost overnight have kind of just gone through financial loss. And I said, like, so the way we're talking about protecting this ecosystem and this language of commercial art and selling just sounds distasteful, in my opinion.
Very much. And I think what I'm interested in as a point of view, or as a person who owns a business, I think I want to allow myself to be in that state of mind where I can think. So right now I can't think. So if you can't think, your content will not be produced. And I think I'm very fascinated by what's happening right now, and I think it's extremely it's a moment which will really make us realize how fragile things are. And I think I'm just taking a step at a time.
And I mean, is it a sense of like, if certain art spaces or institutions want to think, and so it means not posting a million things on social media and saying this is what we're doing, and if they don't do that, is that a bad thing or a good thing? You know what I mean? There's like pros and cons, because
I think it's totally.
How do you share what? Okay, like we want to be with you, we want to support this process of thinking, but if it also means you're pushing, because I'm also seeing with other brands, right? So in the service sector, like some people are doing it correctly, some people are not, as if like nothing's going on. It's like read the room, right? Like how your tone, and if and I think maybe, and I understand if certain institutions or artists or gallery art spaces, if they don't post anything, does that mean, they're just not doing anything? But that's not necessarily true.
It's totally fine to stop.
Yeah.
I stopped, and I also tried to create a sense of normality in this very pretentious, extremely distant reality of just sitting and swiping your mobile phone. I mean, yes, people know that it's the March week in Dubai. A lot of people are looking at it at that angle. We already know there is a lot happening, already being planned by a couple of us, including our district, who've been extremely generous to think a bit forwardly, which is nice. But I believe that I'm keeping very consciously a system intact where things are just given a bit of slowness to, because I'm also, I run the gallery on my own. I do not have someone who has been hired to promote my exhibitions. So I think that temperature which I feel I'm going through, I'm projecting it through these small little extremely relevant platforms now. And I am strategizing, of course, because I need to also pay my bills. But my strategy is something that I believe you will very hopefully see slowly.
And where have you noticed, Kevin? Because again, you come from a background of communication and strategy, and so I'm interested to get your thoughts on what you've observed, what you've what kind of caught attention or?
Well, I mean, I think we've been through it, but I think I don't think there's a system of everyone is kind of making it up as they go along. Although in the very beginning it did
felt
seem
like that. Yeah.
There seemed to be like a bit of a knee jerk that okay, well, let me scramble and do this, and I kind of get a feeling that we're coming out of this scrambling phase, and people are actually trying to plan out a little bit more. So I see things coming out from galleries now where there's a little bit more storytelling around artists, where films that you may have only gotten a trailer of before, you'll actually see the full 45 or 47 minutes and 36 seconds of it now. So there's a certain shift in terms of visibility of things. And again, I think that's true for institutions as well as for commercial galleries. Again, how do artists promote? I can only see from, again, the work that I do teaching primarily in Tashkil here in Dubai, that I mean, I think artists are also kind of digging in a little bit more to use time for their practices differently. Again, I mean, I think it's interesting to see that people who don't necessarily spend a lot of time sitting still are now forced to, sort of stay at home and do things. And I'm finding artists trying, I work with a couple of artists in terms of like practice advisory, helping them, through their practice, but also in how they write about their practices, how they, I hate to use the word promote themselves, but how writing sort of that they put out in the world reflects the pillars of their own practice. And I find that this is a moment where they're very keen to have those conversations with me. They're very keen to say, well, I have these 5 strands to my practice. How do I bring them together? Or, I want to be able to do, a painting a month, but how do I get closer to a sort of narrative structure in my work rather than kind of just this kind of accumulative sort of gesture that I've been doing all along. So I maybe it's just luck that, my kind of hammering away at this for so long is kind of bearing fruit. But I feel that there is a moment now where there are people, artists in this community who are sort of taking a step to kind of re-engage with the process. And you would have to call that strategic, right? That's not a knee-jerk. There has been thought and time that's gone into it to say, okay, well, here I am as an artist, and now I'm being forced to rethink things, and and this is kind of the help that I need from you to get to this, to this place where I want to be. That's, by definition, a strategy.
Because I've seen examples where like some artists are giving, drawing classes on through Instagram stories, for example. Or I also noticed Naqd, so the kind of this collective that focuses on art criticism, and they're trying to help, I think, other freelancers in case they've lost job opportunities because things have shut down, and trying to find ways, I think, to help them. So I thought that was quite interesting. Another example is Lawrence Abu Hamdan. He's kind of posted his video works, which are like, long pieces, 20 to 40 minutes on YouTube. And I think the comment he said was these works were meant to be showing in exhibitions that aren't happening, or they've been postponed. So they'll be online till these exhibitions happen. So I thought that was an interesting gesture of sharing work. But I also think about people who are doing all of this, artists, so it's free labor, like, so, and how much of that, as it is, I think we are in a region where I think artist labor is not necessarily respected enough, and not paid well enough, and it's treated as, exposure seems to be a form of currency by people who are hiring jobs. So I also kind of question my making things so easily visible and available online. Is this going to slowly normalize this way of thinking of, I don't need to pay for this because it's online? Your thoughts, Zahra?
This is what, going back to it, you don't want to kind of sort of put your work up digitally because, things have just been cancelled, and like, how do we kind of sort of promote your work and give that authenticity that your work deserves? Yes, of course, my question goes back to goes to like galleries or curators, how can they support artists on a digital platform? There are models which have been practiced abroad where, you have constant shows that are being curated on a digital platform, and so that gives an artist like a boost or kind of sort of an intention to create more work. So I think these are like sort of important parallels that we can kind of sort of bring in over here and kind of sort of talk about it from artist perspective, like we're investing ours end, which no one really sees
Exactly.
or
Yeah, there's a lot of
understand,
there's a lot of unrecognized labor that goes
totally
into it.
and like even at this point we kind of sort of in some ways talking about the loss that's happened from audience perspective, but like how do artists can get funding or aid in this time of crisis where we were in some ways relying on a lot of projects which are now just being cancelled. So yeah, these are things which are like sort of important to kind of sort of think about and how we can renegotiate that space. I mean, like even like just the aid in terms of like how can we like talking about making work, where can artists make work, especially since now we're all at home. I've been in a position where I've kind of sort of created work between my main door and the kitchen, because that was my desperation. But like how can we kind of sort of bring in spaces for makers, especially here, to involve in making and do things according to that.
Yeah, I mean those kind of spaces are already limited anyway. So like Tashkil is a space where I work out of, that's closed. So what I can't go and test and experiment, and so yeah, whoever has to do work at home has to. But yeah, not every artist can just easily make something at home, right? It's it's very different to many different people. But I also kind of looked at examples. I know, like in the UK, the Art Council kind of announced ways of trying to support artists in times like this. And I've been saying this for many years. We don't have that kind of entity here in the United Arab Emirates. There's no centralized art body or council that's there in time that could, I'm not saying just to help in times of crisis, obviously, but to me, this has, I think, shown a lot of what's lacking. So this period has emphasized what's lacking, and I'm hoping what's lacking is something that gets brought up in different discussions, which is why this is one of the platforms I'm trying to use to raise that. And, do you think there's potential that this could lead to some kind of centralized council that's there to support in terms of funding artists or even small galleries, right? So like how there's SMEs, and there's like an economic kind of cash flow that's supporting small businesses. What's an equivalent for gallery spaces that maybe has employees of, up to 4 people, for example, right? So I'm not talking about kind of big name galleries. What do you think there's potential for something like that? And if there is, how does one rally for something like that? Kevin? Putting you on the spot.
Well, no, I mean, I'm slightly pessimistic about
all right,
happening for, just looking at the ground here. Because, it's a very neoliberal place, and we're all very much reliant on the commercial framework to survive. So who would step in to do that? Maybe you'll find a private donor or some kind of benefactor to do that. Who would be the usual, instances that do that in less kind of neoliberalized spaces, or at least where that reliance on the commercial is in primary over, any kind of safety net that would come from a federal or a municipal level, a grassroots thing where you engage them to look at something simple like spaces. I mean, people who have been sort of, I used to work at Tashkil a lot as well. And I think there are, the people who were working at Campus Art Dubai's studios around, for the art fair production are now sort of, orphaned in a way.
Homeless.
Because that doesn't exist anymore. So it's simple to find spaces and provide spaces for people to work in at a safe distance, obviously, and everything sanitized and according to the rules. But, those are easy things to do. Then the funding and, a wider sort of social safety net for people whose businesses are struggling and things like that within the creative industries are, is that's a harder thing to imagine. And maybe, something like Art Dubai, why wouldn't they do that? Because I think part of Art Dubai is, so leave Dubai culture aside for a moment, but I mean, if you look at Art Dubai has done a lot to, create these creative industries that we have today. I mean, a lot of the designers that are here came through Art Dubai. A lot of these, artists grew and collectors grew because of those early years of Art Dubai. So wouldn't it be logical now for Dubai to kind of I wouldn't say bail out because it's kind of crude, but to somehow give back.
True. I mean, and I'm hoping times like this would maybe get people to think about this, and hopefully whoever's listening to this as well. Because yes, I go back to when the financial crisis happened, and we're like, oh, things will be better and things will improve, but it didn't really necessarily work out that way for a lot of industries and people. But I'm thinking, yes, if it's not something that comes from a government or federal level, then is it then private institutions, or an example like Art Dubai, where you said an opportunity to kind of rethink how, I mean, I know the priority obviously is the galleries and collectors, and that's a role of an art fair, as a default. But what else, if there's this kind of stance of engaging with the community, which, comes across in some of the programs they do, right? And yeah, I don't know. I know Sharjah Art Foundation, they normally have like several grants that are offered throughout the year, and I don't know how that fits in times of crisis, because everything kind of now is in times of crisis. But unfortunately, we don't have many examples of, like grants. We don't have a long list of grants people here, artists can refer to that they can apply to, right? Like it's almost shameful that they have to apply abroad for artist grants, and there's not enough within. So this is an open call, an open plea for opportunities to rethink these structures. I mean, there are definitely more art institutions that are very supportive, but of artists, but it's again through very kind of smaller circles. So it's not necessarily that's something that's put out there as an open call that invites everyone to participate.
But the ripple effect might also kill artists are affected because they're like the most vulnerable now. But I mean, there's a whole circle of people of, freelancers or self-employed like me who will, eventually not really, I mean, that income will sort of dry up somehow,
of course.
or be much more much more stilted in terms of how it comes out. So again, like, do these people just like stop working and become errant, beggars in parking lots? I don't know what the catastrophe scenario is for something like that, but in a way, I mean, you can probably expect to and now you can't really go. I mean, you could go somewhere, but you'll never come back, right? So there's
travel,
now, and travel,
borders are closed.
I think in 2008, it was okay to just leave. And just you could go and whatever, but now that even becomes an issue.
And how strict is it like to raise funds, right? So if we say a bunch of artists, put an open call, please help us, especially like freelancers, let's raise funds. And I think raising money for charity, I think there are lots of rules to it. But I say this just because, again, I've seen examples where I think some sort of freelance group is raising funds for people who've lost jobs, say in the cinema industry, so like people who are working there on hourly basis, all the cinemas have been closed, what happens to them? And people have just been donating money, through like a GoFundMe, account and whatever. And I don't know what kind of, again, how would that appear? I don't know if it's against the culture to put an open call like that for asking people to, donate. I don't know. Any thoughts on this?
I think I will go back to what the earlier conversation was around funding. Then maybe I'm also somebody who thinks in the present. So I just felt when we were talking, I was thinking about strongly, which I had thought about 2 days ago, about how everybody has closed borders, which means that that limits the periphery, even if you're thinking about the internet, which is more sort of the feeling of, for example, reading something on a Facebook update, excuse me, and as versus a letter, which is handwritten. It's that kind of feel. So I think that these borders closure will also be a very telling time to really expect a sense of inquiry of things which are around us. Because going back to collectors and all this stuff, like how we pay our bills, I don't have much of a groundwork done. Now maybe I have to work closely here.
I think it's also really important for us to kind of sort of emphasize on making, we don't even have subsidized studios for artists,
True.
like think about it in such a way where, okay, the cancellations of all these gigs are happening, fine, we can sit down wherever we can and work. But this is where I think we need to put more emphasis in.
Kevin, I mean, are you hopeful? Do you think, I don't know, certain brands will start to think about nurturing culture, embrace it and not just think of it commercially?
You mean because of what's happening
Yeah.
now? Look, I think there's a small window, like a little bit of a glimmer, right? I don't think I would jump for joy right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's always a little bit of a glimmer of hope that these arguments can be put forward, and that there's a kind of conviction that people could start to take. And again, I think you'll see it. It's kind of the same way that we're getting a curfew. It's kind of step by step. Everything is happening very gradually, and I think that's how it will happen as well. I do think that it's a huge playing field for culture, though, at the moment, as much as we are sort of silenced and stuff in many ways and kind of reeling from whatever kind of lack of attention. I really do feel that in a cultural space, I mean, again, this podcast is a testament to that we can actually start to be the ones to ignite certain conversations that other people are not necessarily having. And again, I think that with the institutions, that idea of sending those things out to the other components of society, notably brands, companies, to have more of these conversations. I think everyone is still worried about survival. I think a lot of brands that are fundamentally very opportunistic, so they worry about how they're going to stay alive. But at one point, when those fears are somehow allayed, maybe there's a way in for cultural players to actually engage with them a little bit more.
Because, I mean, the irony, of course, is, we talk about the importance of culture because that's what feeds our soul and this is important. But that was one of the first things that shut down, right, in times of crisis. And so I worry that it'll still be considered as, a nice to have and not, what's the value of culture that is beyond commercial and financial benefits, and obviously understandable why spaces were closed, right? I mean, after the schools were closed, I think, the cinemas were closed, and then museums, and then it becomes, and those were closed, obviously, because, you don't want reducing number of people, and yet we talk about the importance of art and how to, so I feel there's this kind of two sides of the coin. There's, there's contradiction, and how, what's the light at the end of this tunnel that will give culture here? And I'm specific to UAE because, like I said, it's more it's a nice to have, it's a good PR exercise perhaps for certain entities, and how will this be seen as it's important and just as valuable as XYZ that also makes money? I don't know, am I being super naive?
No, but I mean, I think you're right that it's the most vulnerable and it's the easiest to shut down. But again, I mean, I think for us having, working in this field for so long, we see that it is a place where these conversations can happen. It's not a luxury group or a car franchisee that's going to have the conversation that we can sort of hope to at least infiltrate or spread it out a little bit more. So yeah, I mean, I understand the kind of complexity of it, but I also feel that it's not too naive to think that, I mean, I spend a lot of time trying to talk to people that artists are not just makers, right? Artists are thinkers, especially now. Contemporary artists spend a lot of time conceptualizing and think, as I said earlier, more strategically than they used to. And I think maybe it's these artists as thinkers that will be the ones to kind of shake some sense into everyone else, or at least, I mean, shake some sense is probably not the right expression, but it's this idea of eye-opening, right? It's this idea of having the conversation about whatever, space, resourcefulness, resilience. These are the kind of conversations that I think that we can try to ignite.
And we've seen people just finding interesting ways of making art and songs and sharing online, despite the closures and limitations on where to be in public spaces. So, like balcony concerts or group exercise on a rooftop for the neighborhood to see. So it's been quite interesting showing like people, I think, people will find ways of connecting, and as much as I'm usually very cynical and I don't have faith in humanity, but times like this I've seen actually a lot of people are banding and getting together and and it's been uplifting to see. And I mean, I read this article yesterday in the Financial Times by Nigerian poet and novelist Ben Okri, which kind of talks about what we just covered, and the title is of the essay is "We Need Art More Than Ever," and it ends with, "We have to find a way to keep culture alive. It is not only through virtues that a people die. A people also perish when they fail to keep alive the values that make them human, the wellsprings of their sanity. It may well be that it is not only self-isolation and science that saves us. We may also be saved by laughter, by catharsis, by the optimism of being able to see beyond these times with stories and community and songs." So I thought that was a beautiful, uplifting piece to read. I urge readers to look for it. I urge listeners to listen to it, to look for it. It's in Financial Times. The title is "We Need Art More Than Ever." And if you haven't read it, here, my fellow guests, you should. And probably something maybe to refer to, we need art now more than ever. And maybe to wrap this up, I'm curious to know, how have you guys been coping the past few weeks, like in this self-isolation mode that we've all been put into? Whether, are you with someone? Are you alone? How are you dealing with it? What are you reading, eating, listening to? Kind of curious.
So I've been reading a lot of Nicholas Mirtsev recently for just personal reasons, because I'm trying to write a class on kind of visual literacy and visual culture. So I've been reading The Right to Look and so, and John Berger and Susan. So these are books that have been in my past 10 days. And last night I said, no, I'm taking a break from this, and I read The Haunting of Hill House. I don't know if you, but the original Shirley Jackson, not the Netflix series kind of. Script, but the original Shirley Jackson from the 50s, a beautifully written book, but like 280 pages in just one shot to, I don't know, somehow take a break from everything. But I'm finding reading is obviously, I spend a lot of time reading, but I'm finding a kind of pillow now in the reading. It's really like succor in a lot of ways. It's really kind of, it just kind of replenishes me even more. I think I'm more conscious of that kind of engagement with books.
Zahra, how have you been coping?
Well, I've been like cocooning myself in the studio at this point, and I'm also, but I'm reading The Nest by Janine Burke. And I'm also reading this book called The Living Consciousness, and it kind of sort of tackles the writings of Henry Bergson, which is, so that's like my kind of sort of heavy read, whereas The Nest, which kind of sort of talks about the behavior of birds, is my light read. But so I've just been, I think I'm kind of sort of utilizing my time between reading and mostly painting at this point,
Umer, what have you been doing to cope?
I'm looking at Instagram.
Okay.
I look at people's stories. I get fed up when I look at them for a few hours. But I enjoy some. I think there's fantastic humor coming out at this time, which is also extremely critical if you read it that way.
Any specific accounts you want to give a shout out to?
I really loved this account, which my friend shared it with me. It's basically, I think, I don't know who did it, but we were also even it's called the Corona Residency.
Okay. I heard about it.
Yeah, it's called COVID-19 Residency.
All right, yes.
I mean, I think it's really something which, in a way, is probably operated by an artist or a collective, and they're talking about us, the commercial art gallery market. It doesn't. I don't fit that particular bill because I don't work like that. But generally, I think it's extremely smart, and I also. Started reading a book which are published by After All, which is also related to the school where I went to, St. Martin's. They started this small publication, they were looking at these series of books which speak about one work in one book, and I'm looking at Agnes Martin's work, Night Sea, one of her fairly important paintings, and the book usually just focuses on one single painting, and they just do an autopsy of the work. It's by a woman named Suzanne Hudson, and the series of books are called One Work, and it's by After All Books. And I think the reason I'm interested in this direction also is how I think. If I'm looking at an artist, I don't look at a lot of their work, and I just look at one work. And that's how one of my professors, who also teaches in Zayed University, started teaching us art history, to look at one painting in art history back in the days. So that was quite special, and it stays with me.
Cool. It's all quite heavy and intense. I mean, I'm just missing watching movies because cinemas are closed. So I know the first movie I watched at home after the cinemas closed was Contagion, which probably didn't help.
I watched it.
You know, and then I decided I need to watch something slightly lighter, but I haven't. I've actually struggled to focus. So despite us, you know, being at home, I struggled. Like even Contagion took 3 attempts to finish it because I'm actually. The first week or so was very difficult to focus. But then I decided just to do maybe like stretch exercises and go out for walks. And it's kind of invigorated my mind a bit. So I feel a bit more uplifted and, you know, find maybe a director and just focus on his films or her films and just get through this till better times come to us, and I hope sooner better than later. And I just want to thank Warehouse421 for allowing this conversation to happen, and hopefully there'll be more Warehouse421 conversations. And I want to thank you all so much for joining me, and we'll just, I think, maybe keep carrying on this conversation and asking these questions, and let's see how things change for the better for everyone. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.